Hello guys, and welcome to the official Kickstyler review and tutorial by Audesign. First of all, if you already know what Kickstyler is and don't want to hear some pretty good points on how this patch can save your life, beat your family and make your homework, then you can skip to this timestamp to get to the tutorial. Alright, so what is Kickstyler? Kickstyler is a one-of-a-kind patch for FL Studio that pretty much acts like its own plugin and solves one of the most difficult parts of being a hard dance producer. Kickstyler is the fastest and easiest way to design your kicks with awesome sounding results. Making a good sounding hard kick is often a very long, experimental and delicate process that can be a lot of fun, of course, but it can also be tedious, confusing and sometimes difficult for a lot of you, especially for beginners. Sometimes you just want to get straight to the point, and well, here at Audesign, that's what we're all about. So Kickstyler takes all of that away and streamlines the process of sound design so you can focus fast and easily on getting to a result that you like. After months of gathering data on the way top-notch producers choose to create their kicks and researching the most used and effective methods, it all eventually came down to what you're seeing on screen right now. Okay, so before we begin, I want to showcase some of the reasons as to why I think Kickstyler can be an amazing tool for you. Number 1. It lets you create your own hard kicks by scratch. That means you can avoid using samples and, well, using them is just fine and there's nothing wrong with that. Kickstyler lets you have full control at all times for all the pieces involved. This can be super helpful while automating literally anything within it, as the kick is being processed in real time. We'll see more about this later in the video. Number 2. It makes your life so much easier. Sometimes having all the tools available to you can be overwhelming and you can get stuck in the process with no real results. Kickstyler removes that problem altogether, creating an easy workflow and letting you hear the results instantly. There is no need to set up plugins, chains or buses of any kind, as everything's already prepared for you. Number 3. There is no latency. Literally none. Well, that's a lie, it's actually 0.05 milliseconds, but come on. That means you can actually use it in your song, alongside all the other synths and things you have in it. I also want to say, and I guess that counts as number 4, that I made this patch. Yup, this one's my baby. I used to be a hardstyle producer and I'm a big enthusiast on hard kick sound design, so I put a lot of care into it to make it the most effective and intuitive it can be. And now, without further ado, let's jump into it. Because Kickstyler is a patch that uses a couple of external plugins, please make sure you have installed OTT by Xfair Records and Mistortion 2 by Nimble Tools. Don't worry if you don't, as both of them are free and can be found instantly through a quick search. Okay, you can load Kickstyler by dragging it into the instrument rack, and let's play some notes. As you can hear, we start with a clean 909 kick. Your kick will automatically decay into silence after a whole note, but if you make it shorter, it will make a full stop with no release. Now, there's a couple of things you need to know. When making your kick, make sure to decide on your desired tempo and root note. This way, you'll make sure the kick doesn't sound different when you change those things later. But you'll see better why in a moment. Kickstyler has a workflow built into it that you can follow to assure a good result. Your 909 oscillator, 2 chains of distortion. The kick is then divided into Tok and Crunch separately, where you can tweak them in different ways. Additionally, you can use 2 extra layers to the crunch for more texture. And if you're a beginner, following these first steps in order will especially help you to develop a good habit. After that, you can add things like reverb to your kick, which is pretty important, some post-processing effects, an optional LFO, and finally a master EQ. For those of you who are not familiar with this process, Kickstyler can look like a little bit too much right now, but trust me, after this video you'll be convinced on why it's the complete opposite. I'll show you how every section works by actually making a kick now. Let's throw some simple notes, I'll make them G. And set my tempo to 150 BPM. You would assume to tweak this section first, and you'd be right, but we can barely hear the tone of the 909. So let's add a quick distortion first to better hear what we're doing. Oh yeah, that's better. You have some control over your 909, and that's the pitch, the slide, and the tension. Pitch changes the initial tone from where the kick starts. A higher pitch means a more punchy kick. It is set all the way up by default, as it's usually what you want for this, but hey, you can adjust it. Second is the slide time, and it's exactly what it sounds like. In other words, how quick the pitch slides down to your root note. And third, we have tension. This shapes the curve of this light to make it stay for longer or shorter time in your initial pitch. This may sound trivial now, but with some distortion down the line, it can be useful to make your kick sound vastly different depending on how you set it. Your 909 section also contains some initial distortion. We're gonna add much more and in different ways in a second, but this one's important. Every time you add a new distortion, it's affecting the current sound. So this one will determine the basic tone of your kick before you move on to the chains. But yeah, it's your classic clip distortion and it sounds so good. You can control how much bass is entering your distortion, so more bass adds extra harmonics, less bass gives you a more muffled sound. SIM stands for symmetry, and for those not yet familiar with this term, you're gonna instantly recognize what it does. Check this out. So almost all of hardstyle kicks are based on the characteristic sound this gives to your kick drum. I don't wanna get too technical, so I'll just give you my trusty visuals to demonstrate the magic behind it. Okay, let's now actually play with this and find something interesting. Cool, now that we've covered what distortion does, this is gonna be a walk in the park. Our next section contains two identical chains.
What the frick is a chain, bro?
I hear you asking. A chain is basically what some people call a set of EQ and distortion in the process of creating a hard kick. Basically, if you want to give character to your kick, you'll have to boost and excite some frequencies within it. The trick is letting the distortion shape what we're doing before it and hearing the results on the go. So if we applied only the EQ, it will sound like this. Exactly as you'd expect. But if we apply distortion afterwards, it wildly affects the outcome. These ones you already know what they do, so let's focus on the resonance. Amount adds a bump in the equalizer. It can be subtle or it can be extreme. It just kinda depends on what you're looking for. With frequency, you can choose the position of this bump in the spectrum, and this little button here adds a valley before it. This can give you a different sound, and more often than not, it results in something more interesting in my opinion. And you already know what bass does, my dude. Chain number 2 is exactly the same, only applied afterwards. It might seem redundant, but not really. With every chain of distortion, you're affecting the sound before it, so you're giving it extra harmonics that result in a more complex sound. The sound gets more intricate and rich. Let's use both and you'll see what I mean. That was chain number 1, and now let's move on to chain number 2. Alright, you've made something that sounds a certain way, and that might be good enough for you, but of course Kickstyler doesn't stop here. From now on, your kick is divided into 2 sections. Well, in reality it always was, but the chains affect the kick as a whole and the transition between each part is seamless. So anyways, the tok and the crunch. The tok is the very first part of your kick, your attack. The crunch is the bass part, your root note. The very first thing to mention is that you can actually adjust how long your tok is with this light right here. Because your kick is split into 2, we can now adjust the volume of each separately. So let's mute the crunch to hear this. 0% makes the tok sound for roughly 1/8 of the whole kick, and 100% is half of the kick, which is a lot, but it sounds good depending on what you're doing. If you need more than that, I'm sorry to say this, but you're a psychopath and you need to be locked away in a psychiatric hospital. Alright, now let's dive into what you can do in each section. They have similar options, but not all of them, because they need different treatment. The first part is the character, and this is yet another chain in disguise, but directed specifically at the tok or the crunch. It also works a little different for each one, even though they look identical in the surface. For the tok, drive adds distortion alongside a bump in the EQ all at the same time, and the tone note narrows or widens this bump. You can then choose its frequency. For the crunch, however, it's a little different. Drive adds distortion alone regardless of the EQ, which comes next. Here, the tone knob is bipolar. This means that when it's centered, nothing happens, and moving it each way gives you 2 options. In this case, 2 different curves in the equalizer. And of course, you can choose its frequency. You will notice these curves are actually different from the previous ones on the chains, and they can help you make your crunch more talkative. Talkative? Talkative.
Talkative.
Anyways, more of a voice quality to it, as it adds more formants. Next, you have a knob in both parts that just balances your EQ curve to make it more high or low sounding. Maybe you feel like in the process of distorting your kick so much, you need to remove some highs or some lows. This is here to take care of that. Okay, now let's apply all of this. Okay, now we've arrived at something that you will agree is pretty cool: punch and sub. This is conveniently designed to make this process so much easier and accessible to everyone. See, adding distortion is pretty cool and all, but it doesn't mean it will keep adding more and more aggression to your kick. Your bass gets all dirty and mushed up, everything sounds plain and boring. We have so much harmonics now that loudness itself has lost its meaning. It sounds like shit. We've gotta clean this up if you want to achieve something that sounds professional. Let's check the punch section first. If you activate it, it cuts all the impossibly destroyed bass content of your Tok and replaces it with a clean bass beneath it, similar to the 909 we started with. And so it restores the punchiness a kick drum is supposed to have. You can make it either very obvious or subtle, and you have pretty much everything you need to shape it. Amount is the volume of the punch, tone is exactly what pitch does, and present adds a soft clipper that makes it slightly more aggressive. So yeah, punch is just a transient really, a clean sine wave that brings back the actual kick in your hard kick. For the crunch you have something similar, all the distortion made our sub bass sound pretty terrible, so you can replace it with a clean one. Controlling the bass harmonics in a hard kick is something that can drive a lot of people insane, and it is for a good reason. It's just a lot for beginner or even intermediate level producers. This sub is specifically designed to be the industry standard and used in pretty much all modern hard dance productions. Even if you leave it as it is, it's already gonna be perfect. Just make sure to balance its volume so it's mixed evenly with the crunch, and voila! With tone you can make it sound more like a square or a saw wave, adding or subtracting even harmonics, but either way it's gonna be fine. Bass, however, is another concept that you need to understand, and this one's pretty important, so bear with me. I'll make it easy for you. When adding two sounds that share the same tone, in this case our sub with the distorted crunch, the starting point of one wave is gonna modulate the other. And in this case, I'm not talking about AM or FM synthesis, by the way. This is just the effect of life with sound waves. Look at this example. The difference in starting points can alter how the resulting wave looks and sounds. This is especially true when you add distortion afterwards. There might be some harmonics or simply parts of those waves that get distorted more depending on the phase of each one. So now, returning to our kick, you can slightly shift the phase of the sub to better fit the result you want. Just play with it and listen to what sounds best for you. There is no wrong answers. The last section is simply called. This is just dynamics and controls the attack and release time and the volume. The Tok has only an attack slider due to the very nature of it, it's just a transient. So you either want it to hit harder or softer. And this LITE is actually the only one of these that's bipolar. Like I said before, if you restart it to the starting position, it's set to the middle. If you bring it down, it will lessen the attack, take away that hammering. If you increase it, the attack will grow more aggressive, hitting you harder in the face. For the rest of the dynamic sections around Kickstyler, because you see there is actually a few more of these, the attack and release work differently. Your crunch doesn't need an actual attack time. You don't need it to hit you in the face, that's the Tok. These sliders actually shape the in and out volume curve of the sound. Looking at the visuals, you can see exactly what it's doing. This is useful to create different kind of vibes in your kick. Chances are, with so much distortion up to this point, your wave is as flat as a pancake. Do you want the Tok to hit and then the crunch to slowly appear before it? Then you would set it like this. Or maybe the opposite is true, with the crunch being instant after the Tok and then fading away. Maybe it's neither of them and instead you just want to add some bounciness to it. It's all up to you, but you can see how this can instantly restore a more natural aspect of your kick drum. Alright, that's it for this section, and to be honest, Kickstyler will still be cool as heck if it ended here, but you can already see that we've reached for something more complete, something that can accommodate the needs of everyone using it. We're now looking at layering our kick drum, and you have 2 layers conveniently set up for you to get more texture and mix it into your kick. You can activate layer number 1, layer number 2, or both of them at the same time, but they work independently of each other. But okay, let's get to what is a layer here. Well, each layer is actually a copy of your crunch coming out of this chain. Each one is treated with an EQ curve to emphasize the lows for the first one and the highs for the second one. More on that later. Think of these layers as 2 more options to create more textures. Different sounding options which then can be selectively mixed into your main crunch. This of course adds another, well, layer of complexity to the process, but it's actually really easy to do, and it gives you a huge variety of options to shape your sound. So let's get into it. To mix it up a little, these 2 layers can be processed in a slightly different way than your main crunch. First of all, you can choose between 5 types of distortion for each one, so you can further experiment with the results each one gives you. Drive, as always, increases the amount of distortion selected, and frequency just moves around a little bump in the EQ curve to help you emphasize a specific set of frequencies and make it stand out from the main crunch. And these work in the same way for both of them. The EQ curve on each layer plays a role on the outcome, of course. That's why it's designed this way. Having the exact same settings on each layer, so for example something like this, will still give you 2 different sounds, as the first one will distort the low frequencies more and the second one will distort the high frequencies more. After that, you can adjust the dynamics of each one to choose how they will be mixed into your main crunch. And after having processed your layers, they come back right here. So these knobs will still affect the overall sound of everything mixed in. Let's do a quick comparison with and without them. And now we can actually go back and balance the EQ a little. And now for something very exciting, it's Reverb! Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Does Reverb really need its own section here? Isn't it just supposed to be on effects? And the answer to that is no. Of course, in any other place we all know what Reverb does, but not on a hard kick. The sound of a reverb used in hard kick has been so well rooted in the hard dance genre that one just cannot live without it. And in Kickstyler, it's designed to be used specifically how you would in a hard kick. First of all, the reverb is created only by the Tok. The crunch has no role in it whatsoever. Let's activate it and see what it does. You can add it in 2 ways. Clean just adds the reverb as you'd expect, no magic tricks going on. And Dirty adds the same one, but in this point in the chain. This means that it's affected by all the distortion added afterwards, in your crunch and layers. Now, explained like that might seem nonsensical, so let me just convince you real quick. Alright, so it obviously sounds very good, and yes, that is really all you need to know, but if you're curious as to why, it's simple. A reverb basically creates a diffuse tail of sound that resembles its source, but it also creates a place for it, the simulation of an actual space, and gives it an extra dimension in stereo, as if the sound is reflecting on every corner in that space. When you mix that reverb in and then add distortion, it acts on it as an amplifier of the subtle differences between the right and left channels, and the resulting sound is a huge stereo opening, but not only that, it also makes it sound crunchier. And that's as far as I'm willing to explain it in this video, as I can already see myself as this emoji right now. Alright, so the next part of the reverb needs little explaining, as it's basically what every reverb on earth has. Let's find something cool. The dynamics part of the reverb works exactly like I described before, and please don't sleep on this, as here resides one key component of modern euphoric hardstyle practices. You see what I mean, right? Reverb can drastically change your kick. This can be a good thing if you want. Yes, you can use it subtly just to add something nice to your kick, but you can also experiment, go crazy, and maybe find yourself with a whole new kick afterwards. I'll just leave it something like this. Okay, so now your kick is done. Well, yeah, but not really. Okay, so the next section is the effect section. And at first, it might seem like just a bunch of subtle finishing touches, but yet again, these can completely transform your kick into something else. Shift only affects the tok, and it's a frequency shifter that can make its voice lower or higher, but it's not exactly a pitch shifter. Lowering it can often give you a more raw feeling to it, for example. Disperse is emulating Disperser by kilohertz without having to actually own it, as it's a rough copy made within FL Studio's capabilities. It only affects the crunch, and while we're fully aware that it's not often its place here on hard kicks, we also know that maybe a bunch of you will like how this sounds when making something more experimental. OTT is just OTT. Okay, for those who don't know, OTT is a multiband compressor and expander that's known to clean your sound and restore the transients to it, as well as more or less balancing the spectrum of the sound to make the bass sound powerful, the mids clean and gentle, and the highs crisp and clear. It is so popular, in fact, that the sound it gives is instantly recognizable, as pretty much everyone making dance music is using it. Inflator is an exact copy of Oxford Inflator. How do we know that? Well, let me show you what Oxford Inflator actually is. Congrats, you just saved $20. Joking aside, you have it right here, and this knob actually doubles down as a hard clipper. If you activate it, you now have the ability to absolutely destroy your kick. I have to be honest, I'm a fan of dynamics, but adding a final touch of distortion is indubitably without a doubt, something that can compact everything together into something that sounds finished. Okay, let's try these effects now. Okay, so now your kick is done. Well, it depends. It might as well be, but maybe you're making a different kind of kick. That's why we have an LFO section built into it, just in case. Oh, and by the way, after these 5 sections, you can totally use the rest of them in whichever order you want. There's really no rules. Try them purely by intuition when designing your own kicks. So yeah, the LFO modulates the volume of the crunch, but not in the same way as the envelope. With this, you can easily add some rhythm to your kick. Let's hear it. You can choose the shape of the LFO with this knob. It ranges from a sine wave to the left all the way to a saw wave to the right. This is what you'd want for approaching a psytrance vibe, for example. The pulse controls the silence length between each cycle, or stack them together to reduce the silent parts. You can choose how much of this modulation is applied. The rate of the LFO gives you 4 options: swing, 8, triplets, and 16ths. You can see how this is useful for creating different kicks for different genres. It's always good to have it at your disposal. And now, we've finally arrived at the final and most important section of Kickstyler. The Master! It's just an EQ, dude. What do you want me to say? Okay, one thing to note is throughout all sections, gain staging is more or less automatically taken care of, so you don't have to worry about blowing up your speakers, or what's worse, your eardrums. The master gain, however, allows you to trespass those boundaries. All the way to the left means absolute silence, so 0 dBs, and turning it all the way to the right means an extra 18 decibels. So just be careful when adjusting it. It is official, you now know how to use Kickstyler and all its features, but I want to focus on another 3 concepts before concluding this video, and it's not necessarily something about Kickstyler, but it's equally important to keep in mind. And trust me, if you open yourself to this, you're gonna get on a whole new level. The first concept is retracing your steps. Sound design is commonly seen as a step-by-step process, a chain of events that leads to a final result. This is true in some cases, but hard kick sound design might as well be the most notable exception to that. I'm referring to going back and tweak previously set parameters from early sections while you are designing a kick. What I'm saying is, in this process it is common practice and you're actually encouraged to do it. Processing a kick with so many steps of EQ, distortion and effects can give way to a really interesting fact. Going back to the first things you touched can surprise you in unexpected ways. So let's just use an extreme example to demonstrate. We're gonna adjust the bass on the very first distortion unit. This simple change gave us basically 3 variations of our kick, simply because we've added so much processing afterwards that it results in a chain reaction. In this same way, you can look for things that can be modified to give you more variations of your kick. Let's actually do it right now. Just let Kickstyler surprise ourselves. I prepared a slightly more interesting bit. Okay, so you see now how this is not a linear process. Every change that I made just now is also valid. Now, in the same way, you can look for things that can be modified to give you more variations of your kick to use in different parts of your track, or even as sound effects, which leads us to the second concept. I truly believe automating some parameters can step up your game instantly when using Kickstyler, and it's the best way to exploit it to the fullest of its capabilities. As I mentioned in the beginning, your kick is processed in real time with no need to bake it into an audio wave. This means you can make changes to your kick with no real need to commit to a single sample. With some simple automations, you can easily modulate your kick throughout your track, making it sound vastly different from one part to another. I'll show you an example with this bit. The last step is to prepare your kick, that is, making sure it will sound good in context, in the actual track you're using it in. The usual way to do this is bouncing the final result into an audio sample and then pitching it up and down. For those of you who already know what I'm talking about, you're probably familiar with a method for doing this that works for you, and that's perfect. However, in Kickstyler, you have the option to skip this step and use your kick in real time within the patch. This comes with some unique pros and cons, so let me explain. Pitching up or down a kick, just as we have it now, sounds pretty awful. What you'll notice is, if we use our kick in different notes, the tok comes along for the ride and you'll lose all the consistency of your transient. And that's because we designed the tok to sound good specifically in the root note, which is G. And now, when used in another note, it loses power and changes the way it sounds in general. What you usually want is to keep the tok intact to preserve its character, and pitch the crunch instead. To fix this, you can use the slide tool in the piano roll. This tool works by first drawing your starting note, then activating the slide to create a ghost note that will determine the resulting note, and the time it will take to slide there. Now, for our purposes, we don't want to perceive this. You can make it seem like there is no slide at all by making it super quick, which results in basically splitting the tok from the crunch. The position of the slide will usually be determined by the timing you chose for your tok. So let's take a look here. We chose the length to be 1/4 of the way of a quarter note, so the slide will go right here. You can now create a melody, for example, leaving your tok do its thing and only affecting the crunch. Make sure to always start your kick at the root note and pitch only the slide notes. Like I mentioned, there is pros and cons to using your kick like this. The pros are pretty obvious by now. You can skip the whole bouncing and preparing part and use it straight away. The cons are performing issues. Kickstyler is no small thing and can take a lot of your CPU usage. So finally, this concludes the tutorial part of this video, and by this point you've probably noticed that this is actually more of a general masterclass about hard kick sound design in general. We're using Kickstyler because it's our product after all and we want to sell this to you, but I've personally seen a need for something like this since the dawn of time, if I'm being honest. We truly believe you'll find Kickstyler a game changer, and I'm not just saying that as marketing in How Design's name. It's because there's truly nothing like it out there. You can get it now at howdesign.store, and it comes bundled with some juicy hardstyle presets, so go check it out. Remember to give this video a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.